everybody for coming. I wasn't expecting so many like this. Great other presentations by Buddha from Taik and Matt as well. We all met before. It's kind of funny. We all worked together at Taik Technologies a couple years ago. Yeah, I hope you had a great lunch. For me, right after the talk, I need to go, unfortunately, to catch my flight. So yeah, looking forward to this talk. My name is Jens. I'm from Germany. I'm the CEO and founder of WunderGraph. I have two lovely kids who keep me entertained when I don't build cool stuff for APIs. And yeah, today we want to talk about the true value of GraphQL. And what I want to do is I want to give you my perspective on GraphQL, where I see the real value. There's a lot of discussion around, all the memes and tweets about like GraphQL is better than REST and whatnot. And a lot of that I think is simply not true. And we should look between the lines, and I want to share my perspective. Disclaimer, we sell a product in the GraphQL space. I don't want to make this a sales pitch. I'm very much enthusiastic about GraphQL. I implemented GraphQL from scratch more than 5 years ago. Like my life and my heart, GraphQL is really at my heart. Like it's really something I very much enjoy. For many years, I worked for multiple companies doing that. Many different companies already use my open source software, like Apple and other super big companies, even though they might not know, because over the years, my open source tooling somehow went into many different products, like Taik and others. And yeah, I wake up in the morning to bring the kids to kindergarten, obviously. This is a great chance to laugh. I heard that it's a bit harder in the Nordic countries to connect with the audience. It's past lunch. Okay. Yeah, and I'm super enthusiastic about GraphQL, and what we're doing at WunderGraph is we try to build the GitHub for APIs. And what that means is, when I started a couple of years ago at Taik Technologies, I got confronted with this diagram. Has anybody seen this diagram before? Raise your hand. Who has implemented it? Raise your hand. Okay, nobody. It doesn't work, right? I've never seen it really work anywhere. It always felt to me absolutely insane. Like it's a great North Star, but somehow it doesn't work. We're not getting there. And I always found it too hard, and I wanted to make that simpler. So that's what drives me. Quick question. Who's familiar with GraphQL? Okay, not everybody. Do you like GraphQL? Less people. And that's something I keep seeing. Like, not so many people actually like it. Who's using GraphQL in production? Okay, some. That's more than the people who like it. So some use it but don't like it. Who's using federated GraphQL? One person. You're a bit shy. You don't want to admit. How's it? Is it going good? Kinda. Okay. Great. Let's talk about some common beliefs in GraphQL. GraphQL solves underfetching and overfetching. I heard this 7 billion times. Is it true? This is Reddit. This is, if we exclude the pre-flight requests, Reddit makes more than 20 GraphQL queries for one single page. So GraphQL solves underfetching, right? The reality is, what most people do when they want to write a blog post or when they create content around GraphQL, they compare it to REST and they say, oh, GraphQL is amazing, it does this and that. And then you see pages like this and you might ask yourself, why is that happening? And the reality is, it's not so important. It doesn't matter. Underfetching, overfetching, who cares? A lot of people say, and I heard this yesterday, and I'm not criticizing the person. There was an amazing talk about hypermedia APIs. And the common criticism is, you cannot cache GraphQL. Yeah, of course you can. Like, not on the HTTP layer, but does it matter? No. You can cache it in a database, you can cache at the application layer, you can have a normalized cache in the client. And by the way, most use cases when you use GraphQL, you have an authenticated user. If I have one user and I go to Netflix and I want to see my landing page, how much do you actually want to cache that? And does it even matter? It's very dynamic content that we serve with GraphQL. So I don't know why we have this criticism. And then there's also companies like GraphBase and Selate, and they make caching quite easy. Like, give them your URL of your GraphQL server and they will cache it. So I don't know if that holds true. This is my favorite pet peeve: GraphQL and errors and status codes. Have you seen this before? And this is actually bullshit, because people have never read the GraphQL specification. So in the GraphQL specification, how many times do we have the word HTTP? Do you have an idea? 0. The GraphQL specification doesn't care about the transport, and that's a feature. So if you complain that this is happening, you haven't read the spec. Sorry. And the thing is, the way GraphQL servers work is, you have a JSON, it contains a field that's query. Inside the query, you don't have an operation or something, you have a GraphQL document. So what's actually happening is, you send an RPC request over JSON to the GraphQL server, and it contains a GraphQL document. And if the GraphQL server was able to process this GraphQL document, that's a 200 OK, because nothing blew up. The response can contain errors or whatever, and this is specified in the GraphQL specification. And that's it. That's because you get a 200 OK, because the server didn't blow up, and that's fine. And there's a spec for errors and how you to do that. And there's also great ways of using union types to return different states, like user not authenticated or something. That can be a union. Yesterday, by the way, I built these slides this morning so I could adjust to the first days of the conference. This is something I like to do. Yesterday, we learned about some amazing technology. This is, what's it called again? TypeSpec. Thank you. Yes, this is amazing. Keep in mind, 35 lines of code. We define our widget service. And what I find very interesting here is, you see, on the one hand, we define models, we define operations, and then we also define routes and paths and tags and get and post and patch and delete and route and patch. And the result is, I had to cut this. It's more than 200 lines of OpenAPI, completely unusable. Like, can you immediately see what's happening? No? This is, I asked ChatGPT to create the equivalent GraphQL specification. 27 lines. No verbs, no routes, no nothing. So on the one hand, you can complain how much you want, how bad GraphQL is, and how stupid it is, and it doesn't leverage HTTP. And the reality is, it's not better than REST. It's not worse. It's different. It focuses on something different. This is much simpler. We can do fewer things than REST. But if all you do is create a widget API, it's very simple to read, and you can immediately know, even if you don't know much about GraphQL, you might think, oh, type query, I can read. Type mutation, I can change stuff. And you can see these operations, and they take parameters, and you don't need to understand, is it in the path? Is it in the header? Is it in the query string? This is all stuff you don't need to know. So one of the claims I'd like to make is, I think the average developer builds a better GraphQL API than a REST API. And a lot of people keep saying, oh, GraphQL is so hard to do and whatnot. This is hard to do. This is hard to master. This is simple. For me, at least. Yeah. By the way, there's a specification, GraphQL over HTTP, where it specifies how GraphQL should work over HTTP. But again, you will find that in most cases, if the request is invalid, you will get a 400 bad request. If something blows up and we can catch it, 500, and everything else 200, including errors. And we can continue talking about that. Another thing that I hear a lot is GraphQL has the n+1 problem. What is the n+1 problem? So we load employees. Let's say that's 10. So we make one fetch to load 10 employees. And then we want to load the details, and they are coming from another service. So for each employee, we have to do another fetch. So that's n+1. So n is 10 plus 1 in the root. So that's 11 fetches. That's the n+1 problem. And the reality is, every API has this problem. GraphQL makes it visible. So you're complaining that you can see it. And if you have a website that uses GraphQL, you can see, oh, we have a slow query. If you have a website that uses REST, the website will load slow. Each individual request will be very fast. So what are we measuring? And then there's also claims that GraphQL is super insecure. You can write bloated queries, you can fetch too much data. And if you talk to professionals, they will tell you there's a pattern. It's called trusted documents or persisted queries or persisted operations, where you, at build time, store the GraphQL document on the server, and at runtime, you will just call the hash of that document. So, yeah, I don't know. There's also the damn vulnerable GraphQL API that tries to create awareness in the GraphQL ecosystem about all the possible vulnerabilities. And there should be a talk after myself from Escape Tech about GraphQL security. I'm not sure if they are here. And that's also something I keep hearing. It was also mentioned yesterday in the Hypermedia talk. GraphQL can be very complex, and nested queries can be slow. And there's two things, defer and stream. So if you have a list of employees and that list loads slow, you can stream it. Your server and client can implement the stream directive. And if it takes a long time to load details, you can have the defer directive implemented. And it will mean that we first stream the employees just with an ID, and then we asynchronously load the details. And with that, I want to go over and talk about a couple of things that I think are absolutely fantastic about GraphQL. Just as a disclaimer, my general opinion is there's a lot of problems that GraphQL is great to solve, and some not so good. And sometimes you should use a REST API, and sometimes you should use a GraphQL API. Nothing is better. Use the right tool for the right job. Kind of obvious. The GraphQL community is absolutely fantastic. Super vibrant. A couple of weeks ago, I was at the GraphQL Conf in San Francisco. It was the first one we had hosted from the GraphQL Foundation, which is backed by the Linux Foundation. Amazing people. If you're interested in GraphQL, go there next year. It's brilliant. We have a super vibrant ecosystem of open source projects and vendors who build software in the space and push it. And here's a graph. Sorry, it's a bit dark. But you can see all the way from 2015 until today, we have very active contributions in the GraphQL specification. One other topic I find absolutely fantastic about GraphQL is, this is a screenshot from our product, but it's just general something amazing about GraphQL. Because clients specify the data they need, API producers get information about how their API is being used, not just at the entity level, but at the field level. And this can be very beneficial, because if you're building large-scale APIs and you only have analytics at the path level for your REST API, you will not really understand what kind of fields nobody's actually using. Can you deprecate it? Can you change it? And then there's another thing that I find very interesting, that's monitoring. So we're working with a Swedish company together, Soundtrack Your Brand. And what they came up with, very brilliant idea, and we want to adopt that, is an @SLO directive. So what they can do at the field level is they can say, get widgets, that's the main functionality of our application. It has a high criticality and it needs to load fast, below 100 milliseconds. Versus creating a widget also has a high criticality, it's super important, but it can be a bit slower, like the P99 can be 1,000 milliseconds. And then something like analyze widget, it's not really used. It can have low criticality. And this is something very simply, because we have field level analytics and metrics at the field level, we can very easily tell which field is too slow, and we can tell the exact team what they need to do to improve. I have 3 more minutes. Authentication and authorization. This is another very interesting concept. You can have directives that tell you this mutation needs the user to be authenticated, and this operation requires them to have a scope. And the final topic I want to cover is composite GraphQL schemas and federation. If you look at the Postman API report 2023, you can see these are obstacles producing APIs, like lack of documentation, knowledge, design skills, etc. The obstacles of consuming APIs, it's usually lack of documentation and discoverability. And the greatest security risks, improper authentication, authorization, leaking data. And how can federated GraphQL actually help here? This is a very simplified intro to federation, but essentially we have a query where we load products and stock data and reviews and author. And all this data is coming from 4 different services. And what federation does is it combines 4 GraphQL microservices with some predefined patterns into one coherent API. And what I find amazing about this pattern is you have 2 things at the same time: centralized governance combined with autonomy in the teams. So that means you can have centralized linting composition checks, like will the schemas from the subgraphs, will they actually merge? Will they be compatible? You can have breaking change detection. If you remove a field, you can look at the traffic field level metrics and understand, oh, we shouldn't remove that. You can have distributed tracing, authentication, authorization, what I just showed you at the federated layer across all subgraphs. And you can have one single policy enforcement point across all your subgraphs. At the same time, the implementation can be distributed. Teams can choose how they do it. And do I need to stop? Wrap up. Okay, so this is my claim. Federated GraphQL is the TypeScript for distributed systems. You can use JavaScript. You can all do it by yourself. Or you can take a paved road and have the TypeScript compiler for distributed systems that understands how the overall thing works. It can give you linting, hints, everything. Thank you.